Kubrick always wanted to make a stylized film about basically war, not necessarily the Vietnam War, but the phenomena of war.
I think what he was very interested in doing was watching the transmutation of young men into killers, exploring the metamorphosis that occurs when you take young people and in effect brutalize them and inure them to a sense of right and wrong.
Kubrick always looked for short-form material that he could adapt, and he'd read about Gustav Hasford's The Short Timers in '79 in a publication called Kirkus Reviews.
The reason he liked it was because it had humor, it was full of craziness, and it was totally off the wall. And that's what Stanley always liked, surprises and off-the-wall things.
The problem was, by the time he'd thought of making a film about the Vietnam War, which would have been around '79, all of a sudden Apocalypse Now appeared.
I don't believe that Kubrick was ever influenced very much by outside events. His tendency was to let other people do the thing, and then he would come in and do the great one. He did that with Vietnam. He let everybody else do their Vietnam film, then he comes in with Full Metal Jacket.
He contacted Michael Herr, who wrote a lot of Martin Sheen's dialogue for Apocalypse Now.
Michael Herr was a great expert. He wrote this book, Dispatches. So he was a top authority on that period.
They undertook what Herr has described as one phone call lasting 3 years with interruptions. And Herr would turn out draft after draft of the screenplay.
So the buzz was in Hollywood. Stanley Kubrick's making a Vietnam movie. Well, you got to get in that movie.
Mr. Kubrick at that point was putting out his message that he was willing to look at anybody's audition tapes. So you had every actor in the world making these audition tapes and sending them off.
Matthew Modine was shooting Birdie at the time that Kubrick first expressed an interest in him. And Alan Parker sent Kubrick some taped material of Matthew Modine doing his actorly bit, being the most Birdie that he could be, thinking that this is how Stanley would see what Matthew Modine was capable of doing as an actor. But Stanley was looking for something different. And it was only because there was a little bit of extra tape at the end where you just saw Matthew Modine not speaking, not acting, but just kind of being, that gave Kubrick the idea that he wanted Matthew Modine in his film.
He's a very good actor. At that time, he wasn't yet a superstar, but he had all the qualities to be one.
He was incredibly talented. He reminded me of a Jimmy Stewart. Very easygoing actor, very simple, and electrifying on screen.
Matthew was actually also instrumental in getting Vincent D'Onofrio, who had no film experience at the time. Matthew and Vince had been friends since they appeared on stage together.
I was working at the front door of the Hard Rock Cafe as a bouncer, and Matthew and his wife walked by, and I said, "Hey, man, where you been?" And he said he's doing this Kubrick thing, and that there was a part available. I didn't even think about being in film. I saw a lot of films, but I saw film actors as being very different people than myself.
Clearly, he was a talented young actor. It has been proven because he made a big career since then. A talented young actor who was flexible and also was willing to put on the weight.
He asked me early on, would I be all right with gaining this weight? And, I said yes, and then I went over there and I gained about 30 pounds, and I remember him seeing it and saying that I only looked like I could kick everybody's ass, so he thought some more weight would be needed, and I think it went up to 80 pounds. I think I went from 2 to 280.
Now, the problem is, when you bulk up for a Stanley Kubrick movie, you have to stay bulked up for God knows how long. You don't know how long the shoot's going to last. And I think that probably took its toll on Vince's body.
People treat you differently when you're that size. And, you got to remember, my head was shaved. So it was like a completely different persona. From being this, long, lanky actor to a big, burly guy with a bald head. It was a very strange life change.
As far as I'm concerned, Vince turned out to be the best part of the film.
I'm not a military type. I'm not turned on by it. I don't like guns. I'm an actor. And I know how to take apart an M16 and put it back together blindfolded. Stanley made my career. There's no question to that. No question. I've done over 50 films because of him. Because of that part. Because Stanley cast me.
We needed an advisor who told us exactly how the details work. For example, the movements that they do with the guns. A normal person doesn't know this. So we called an office in the United States that represents ex-Marines. And we asked for a drill instructor.
Well, I found myself retired out of the Marine Corps back in 1971, and I thought, well, I had no proper education, so really not much to fall back on. Got a phone call from Stanley Kubrick out of the clear blue one evening, and we talked about a Full Metal Jacket, and he hired me as technical advisor.
Our technical advisor comes in, and he starts yelling at us. I'm the boss, and this is that, and you're going to do this, and you're a piece of shit. I'm like, whoa, who's this guy? This is your technical advisor. This is Ermey. He's going to teach you how to shoot.
Ermey was a drill sergeant, and he brought him in to drill the actors into a platoon and made them really work very hard. I think they got extremely fit on that film, the actors.
We just learned how to march like soldiers. I mean, there are scenes in that thing where it is us and it is for real and we look tight.
We observed something very, very strange, namely that he then went to wardrobe and put on a drill instructor's uniform. And he, in a way, fell back in his role. He wore the uniform and he changed his persona. He was a very nice man. And when he wore the uniform, he was a devil. I mean, he was a drill instructor suddenly.
I told Stanley that I would like to do Gunnery Sergeant Hartman, and he told me that he already had hired an actor.
There was another guy who became the door gunner, Tim Colseri, who had the role, and Lee took it from him.
I interviewed all the background extras, and I interviewed these people as Gunnery Sergeant Hartman, knowing that that has to go to Stanley Kubrick. I worked it out where Stanley had to watch me be his drill instructor, whether he liked it or not.
Stanley realized that it would be ideal if Lee actually could play the part.
I think Lee was very, very clever. Lee got up, dressed up, and he did his stuff. And I believe that when Stanley saw that video, he just went, tear the script in half, we're rewriting this, put the cameras on Lee Ermey.
We were also surprised about the language because, you know, I mean, all right, I mean, Stanley's script was fairly realistic, but Lee came up with phrases that were more, say, picturesque. Every time it was something else. I mean, he seemed to have an endless resources on obscenities. And he is a natural actor, there's no doubt about it. Something he probably didn't know. Stanley didn't like to travel, and he wanted to do this film here. I mean, most directors would have gone to the Philippines or do something like that. Well, that was not an option for him.
It seemed to be a preposterous idea to make a Vietnam movie in East London, but Kubrick had a bunch of reasons for shooting his films in England, the principal one being that he didn't like to do anything more than 10 miles from his house.
The last time Stanley left England was to go to the premiere of 2001 in New York, and then he sailed.
One of the biggest reasons he did the film was because there was this gasworks, this abandoned gasworks in East London called Beckton, and they were about to destroy it. But it had the same or very similar French architecture to the city of Hue.
And we got the permission to topple buildings because it was derelict anyway. That hasn't been used since after the First World War.
Anton Furst, who was the designer on it, just went round the place and said, well, if we cut away these pillars on this building, it'll fall over on its side, sort of thing. And hey presto, they did, and the building, sure enough, fell over. You know, it was fairly straightforward. Apparently, it was quite hairy when they were doing it. The story goes that Stanley wanted to dynamite some of them, but they wouldn't let him.
And what he would do is, in order to make it look even more like Vietnam, he flew in a bunch of palm trees.
By adding the palm trees, you really did get the sense of it very quickly that you were over there.
And I think they did a tremendous job because most people don't believe that this was all done in East London, of all places, yeah.
During the filming, I asked, how's this going to go? This is going to go slowly. And it was something none of us were used to.
I don't think you can make films as well as Stanley does without taking that long. I just don't think you can.
Originally, I was hired for 18 weeks, and of course, I knew it wouldn't be 18 weeks.
I believe it was about 17 months. I was brought in on the very first day, and I left on the very last day. 4 months longer than tour of duty.
It was mainly around the sequence where 8-Ball and the Doc get shot by the sniper.
I know that Dorian stayed laying in the mud for a very long time.
We were on that wall for a month doing that scene, from the time we arrived to the time we all get across.
That sequence kept us pinned down, literally, because every time they blasted the sides of the buildings, all the bullet hits had to be reset, and it took them about 2 or 3 days to reset all the bullet hits.
The concussive effect that I got from those buildings, I had never experienced. And I had earplugs in, the whole thing, but just the explosions were so powerful that they would pound into my eardrum.
And I'll always remember what he said to me in the early going, and he said it to me, it was his mantra to me, the whole shoot. He said, Adam, Adam, you're just not patient. I'll never forget that.
The impression I had about him was that he was 99% visual, and I didn't think he knew that much or cared that much about acting. And I was wrong about that, because he did have a great eye for acting.
Stanley likes actors that show up, know their lines, and don't bump into the furniture. And he doesn't want to hear anything else. He doesn't care about motivation. He cares about it in the way that it better be right to tell his story properly. But he doesn't want to talk about it. Show up, know your lines, don't bump into the furniture. Basically, that's it.
He doesn't want to explain to an actor what he's looking for. He's already cast you.
And anything you bring is good enough for him if it tells his story properly. If it doesn't, he'll say, do it better. Do it more interesting. He does use those terms. Doesn't say how to do it, what to do. You f***ed up, do it again. He'll say it right to you, right in front of everybody, no problem.
Although everybody used to think Stanley was very precise about his filmmaking, he used to experiment a lot more than people realized.
And at one point, he got all of the main cast together, and he brought us into his motorhome. And he says, I'm not sure how I want to end this film. You guys have any ideas? We all look at each other. Stanley Kubrick's asking us how we should end his film.
In the script, and I believe it's still in my copy of the script, Animal Mother cuts the head off the sniper and throws it out of the building.
Animal Mother had been carrying a machete on his back the whole show in order to do this one little thing. And so after Joker administers coup de grace, he wastes her and it's some big, important thing that we've wasted this little goog sniper. And Animal Mother takes umbrage at that. It's not that important. He peels out his machete and lops off her head and picks it up. They're all celebrating Joker. And Animal's like, here's the head. That's not a big deal. That's hard. That didn't make it into the film for reasons that Stanley never told me.
It was too horrific, and unnecessarily so. Stanley was not out to do something sensational that is particularly horrible.
After the movie was over and I was being interviewed about the movie, and I said in a complimentary way that Stanley was a perfectionist. And Stanley called me from England. He called my house. I'm not a perfectionist. I'm not a perfectionist. Why did you say I'm a perfectionist? I said, Stanley, you are a perfectionist. What do you think all those takes are?
The most takes that we ever did with me, what do we have here, Private Pal? What is this, Private Pal? What the hell is this, Private Pal? 30-some takes. We got it.
Lee was put through a lot of takes and held up. His voice was really very hard for Lee. His voice went out on him a lot.
The thing I remember most about the Full Metal Jacket experience is Stanley Kubrick. He was a one-of-a-kind person, and I was a student of Stanley Kubrick during that film.
The only thing I can say about making a film with Stanley was you worked harder, I think, for Stanley Kubrick than any other director you worked for. He was a difficult man. There's no two ways about it. He was very difficult at times. There were times when you'd gladly strangle him, but there were other times when you'd walk over broken glass to work with him. You really would.
He was the most patient man that I've ever met, and yet he could be the most impatient of tyrants behind the camera when he was ready and you weren't.
People said of Kubrick, in another world, he would have been a general in an army.
We only hear their names in the very beginning of the film. After that, all we know are their nicknames. Making the transition from being a full-blown person with a name and a personality and your own identity to becoming this killing machine where you don't even have your own name anymore. You become something else. You become a weapon.
What is the significance of Born to Kill and the peace sign on Private Joker's helmet?
it makes him almost literally bipolar.
If you want the lesson of Vietnam, it is that one girl being up in a building, holding off a company of American soldiers, knowing she's going to die. And her job is to somehow or other disrupt, kill, and basically delay, no more than delay, the progress of a company of American soldiers. That was Vietnam.
By making themselves boys again, little kids again, it makes what they had to do in order to deal with what they did deeper, darker, and more troubling.
He told me that he was doing this film as his answer to Rambo. He said that, with Rambo, it was like come out of the water and it was glorifying, and he wanted to show what war was really like.
As a 22-year-old bad reporter, I was in Vietnam. I saw Full Metal Jacket with my wife in Westwood, and the lights went on, and I was a bit grumpy, and then I just started crying. I don't know, the film really hit me in a very, very strange, unexpected, and powerful way.
I think he genuinely thought it was one of his best films, and I still think it's one of his best films.
It's still one of the great war movies and seems better and better. Interestingly enough, the further you get from Vietnam.
What's interesting about Full Metal Jacket is that it's about Vietnam. But God, I look at that movie, it's like Iraq. Kubrick was really making a statement about urban warfare, war in an urban environment. So it's almost like Kubrick was talking about Vietnam, but he was also talking about future war.